everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be getting a little bit technical. I want to talk about different types of stomas, different types of ostomies, and how that all affects your diet, or what you can eat, or what you can absorb, or how well you absorb it. That also goes along with hydration and how ostomies change your hydration and maybe your energy levels, because they can have a huge effect on how you absorb your vitamins and other nutrients. So I want to get into all of that today. Now, just a huge disclaimer, I'm gonna really be clear about this. I am absolutely not a nutritionist, nor am I a nurse, nor am I a doctor, nor am I a PA, nor am I even like a phlebotomist. I am not in the medical field. I am a student of public health, and I have taken a number of anatomy and physiology classes and a lot of things like that, but they're all at a non-professional undergraduate level. So I just want to be very clear with you guys. This video is mostly to give a little bit of a roadmap to people who may be really new to the world of ostomies, or may not even have one and may just be thinking about getting one or have a relative with one. And it's a very generalized perception of why ostomates absorb and digest things differently than other people. So again, not a nutritionist, not a doctor, not a nurse. I would really recommend that all of you, if you have questions pertaining to nutrition and ostomies, you'd go to your ostomy nurse, your nutritionist, even your surgeon. Usually your surgeon will have resources for you, pamphlets and other things, and can give you more personalized attention for your ostomy nutrition needs. I do want to mention also briefly that I, having had 5 stomas up until this point, have consulted with a number of nutritionists myself in different hospital systems. I rarely come across, unfortunately, nutritionists who are familiar with ostomies or even know like why our digestive tract is different from other people's. I'm sure you can find a nutritionist who can give you really good guidelines, very comprehensive guidelines for what you should be eating with your needs, with your disease in mind. What caused you to get the ostomy, I'm sure will affect your nutrition. So with all that said, I really want to get into some of the basics of how an ostomate is different in their digestive tract than other people without ostomies. I want to talk briefly about the anatomy of your GI tract, your gastrointestinal tract, and why each part of it is really important. So first of all, we have the mouth. Everyone is familiar with what this does. We chew our food with our mouth. It's called maceration, and you also get some help from enzymes that are secreted in your saliva that help break down food even before it reaches your stomach. So it's important to chew your food really, really well for optimal digestion and uptake of nutrients. The second thing that is important to touch on is obviously the stomach. The stomach is really important for not only the mechanical digestion of churning, you know, you hear your tummy rumble after a big meal. It churns the food around, it stores food that you've eaten, and slowly controls the passage of food into the intestine. The stomach is also important because it has acid. It's a very acidic environment. It has hydrochloric acid, to be specific, inside of it that helps break down food, large bits of food. The reason I mention this is that a lot of people who have ileostomies and even ascending colon colostomies, or any amount of colon really taken out, will have likely much more acidic stool. A lot of the neutralization of your stool is done in the colon. It's important that you recognize as an ileostomate or an ascending colostomate or a J-pouch patient that your stool is likely going to be far more acidic than other people's, and as a result, your pouch and your pouching system have to be able to handle the acidity of your stool. I personally suffer from very sensitive skin, and my skin around every single one of my stomas has inevitably become very red and raw if I do not treat the skin properly with things like Calvicon and stoma powder. That's because my stool, being an ileostomate, is far more acidic than most people's and therefore can burn the skin. Think about it. You're trying to break down things like meat and vegetables in your stomach with this hydrochloric acid. The acid in your stomach doesn't discriminate between your own skin and the things that you eat. So it's going to break down whatever it comes into contact with. And when you have an ileostomy or an ascending colostomy or a J pouch, you will have more acidic stool than most people. The duodenum in your small intestine, it's the first part of your small intestine. It does do some neutralization for you. Your stool isn't obviously as acidic as when it's in the stomach, but it is important to recognize that not everything is neutralized directly in the duodenum. You will still have acidity upon excretion of your stool. Fiber is a huge part of a human diet. It's really important for us. Fiber, if you don't know, is considered a carbohydrate when you're looking at food from a macro versus micro standpoint. It's a macronutrient and it is indeed a carbohydrate. Fiber is important. It helps us regulate our stool, it helps us with stool consistency, and it also helps control your satiation or your satiety, the amount that you feel hungry or not hungry after you actually eat something, and how long you stay hungry or not hungry. That's kind of what we think of as satiety. And it also affects your blood sugar and the ability of your body to control the movement of stool through the intestinal tract. So there are soluble and insoluble fibers. Insoluble fiber, kind of as the name would suggest, means that it is not able to be broken down in water, H2O, our great friend. Soluble fiber is in fact able to be broken down by water. Very important distinction, although it seems like kind of obvious. Things that would have insoluble fiber will add bulk to your stool. So that's like, we're thinking kale, we're thinking vegetables, we're thinking things that add bulk to the stool and can't actually be broken down by the body like soluble fiber can. Soluble fiber is something that I tend to gravitate toward when I'm trying to control my satiety and my stool. As an ileostomate, insoluble fiber can be problematic for me because passage of it can be difficult, since I don't have a colon. So I tend to gravitate toward soluble forms of fiber, such as Metamucil, which is a supplement some of you may have taken post-op to control your diarrhea. It adds bulk to my stool without the cramping and gas that comes along with having a bunch of bulky, indigestible food inside of me. I would say, again, depending on the type of ostomy that you have, both of these fibers can be more or less beneficial to you. Let's get into first colostomies. Colostomies come in 3 flavors, if you will. There's descending or sigmoid colostomies. That's when the ostomy is made right at the end of the colon. There is ascending colostomies, which is when it's pretty early in the colon that the colon is cut and a portion of that bowel is pulled out to your abdominal wall to make an opening. And then there's transverse colostomies, which is kind of like the middle ground. It's like in between those two extremes. Each of these different types of colostomies will have different stool consistencies. If you have an ascending colostomy, that means that your stool is likely softer and more liquefied. If you have a transverse colostomy, that means that your stool is kind of in the middle. It's wavering between very soft and fully formed, and a sigmoid or descending colostomy will yield a more formed type of stool into your pouch. And the reason for the consistency being so drastically different among all the different types of colostomates is because the colon's primary function in your body is to reabsorb water. The body dumps a lot of water into digestion, and it's important while it's in that slurry liquefied state in the small intestine that the colon reabsorbs a lot of that water so that your body isn't wasting it. That brings us to ileostomates. Ileostomates, there can be a number of reasons why you get an ileostomy, why your whole colon has to be removed. My colon had to be removed because it ruptured in multiple areas and was kind of beyond saving. So I know a lot of people have ileostomies because they have things like Crohn's that largely affect the large bowel, or they may have had colorectal cancer. There are a lot of reasons. But basically, as an ileostomy, you should be aware that your stool is going to be extremely liquefied. or very soft, depending on how well you're absorbing your nutrients from your stool and how quickly your digestion is moving. Also, how well the end of your small intestine has adapted over time to reabsorb or take up the role of the colon in reabsorbing water. This adaptation is something that a lot of ileostomates will get to when they've had their ileostomy for a long enough period of time. However, I certainly haven't gotten there, and I got my stoma back in 2018. My stool is still mostly liquid. Don't worry if it's been a few years and you're still waiting for that adaptation. I haven't had it myself, and as a result, I need hydration therapy. Everyone's a little bit different. Everyone is able to adapt at different rates, so don't be worried. It's normal to be different from the other ileostomates that you may have heard of or that you're familiar with. As an ileostomate, you're open to a few more risks than people who've had their colon retained and have a colostomy. Ileostomy is much more likely to become dehydrated. That's me. You are more likely to experience diarrhea, nausea, sweating, and other unpleasant side effects of dehydration because you're at such a deficit for reabsorbing water once it's actually gone through your small intestine. So keeping that in mind is important because the best thing that an ileostomate can do for themselves is to keep themselves hydrated. I believe one of the #1 reasons that people with ileostomies end up in the emergency room is dehydration. It's a really pervasive issue, so please keep that in mind. If you have an ileostomy, hydration is key. Part of the colon's job, besides just reabsorbing H2O or water, is also reabsorbing electrolytes. So you may be getting enough water, but not enough electrolytes, things like magnesium and potassium. So if you're one of these people who suffers from a deficit of electrolytes, you may need to talk to your doctor about getting medical help for your dehydration. Avoid high fiber foods, avoid high residue foods, avoid fruits and vegetables that have a lot of skins, such as like grapes and tomatoes, and make sure that you chew your food really, really, really well. Additionally, especially for people who are missing a lot of bowel, raw vegetables and roughage, that insoluble fiber that we were talking about, may lead to a lot of discomfort, bloating, because your body has a harder time pushing that through than when you had your full bowel, the colon. Foods that you should absolutely be avoiding right after your surgery are things like mushrooms, celery, whole nuts and seeds, lentils, kidney beans, salad greens, dried fruit, coconut, cherries, grapes, and brown and wild rice. All of these foods are high residue, high fiber, and at least for the first 4 to 6 weeks after your surgery, depending on your case of course, but this is something that I've read on Ostomy dietary guidelines, it is really, really important for you to avoid these foods because they put you at increased risk for complications. I should also mention that directly post-op, after any type of ostomy surgery or bowel surgery even, you are at an increased risk for something called a blockage. A blockage is exactly what it sounds like. It's when a portion of the tube that is your intestine becomes obstructed by something, and they are very dangerous. They can cause some pretty serious complications. I can talk about them in a future video because I've had blockages, and I can say from experience that they are terrifying. So make sure that you avoid these foods directly after your surgery. Usually about 3 to 4 days after your ostomy surgery, your surgeons will allow you to start eating again. Some people are lucky enough that like day 2, they're letting them eat. I personally usually have to wait a little bit just because of how complicated my case has been. It's important to recognize that blockages are very common in the first few weeks and days after your ostomy surgery. The primary reason for this is that after surgery on any part of your body, something called scar tissue will develop. It's basically where your flesh has been injured and your body is trying very hard to rebuild at that specific part. Scar tissue and adhesions put you at a greater risk directly after your surgery for having complications with blockages for your ostomy. The small intestine is where most of your nutrients will be absorbed, but the colon also does absorb some minor things, mostly water and electrolytes, but it also helps absorb B12. So again, really important to keep in mind that as an ileostomate, someone with a J pouch, etc., it's more likely that you'll have a few more nutrient deficiencies than the average bear. However, you still do get most of your calories, most of your sugars and fats and proteins from the small intestine. So don't worry too much. It's not like you won't be able to absorb any food. In fact, many ostomates are able to be just as energetic and have just as little a chance of becoming malnourished as any other person. But there are a few specific things to look out for in terms of deficiencies. The main takeaway I want you guys to get from this video is that every ostomy is different and every ostomate is different. I have a lot of dietary restrictions because my ostomy is certainly not the reason that my bowels don't work very well. I suffer from gastroparesis, which means that my bowels are just not great at moving food through them. So my situation is different from the average ostomates. A lot of ostomates have their ostomies and it really helps improve their digestion because something like the colon was the part that wasn't working, and getting rid of that makes you so much more capable of digesting food than you were before. And you may find that your diet is even more normalized after you get an ostomy, which is what happens for a lot of people. If you have a problem with something in your diet that you read on a website would work with an ostomy, such as canned veggies, cut it out. If it's hurting you, cut it out. I know after my ostomy surgery, my first one, I was told I could eat pretty much anything within reason and that didn't have a lot of bulk, that was basically like low FODMAP, low residue food, but that didn't end up being the case for me. I still can't eat a lot of veggies and a lot of fruits that I used to love because I have other complications on top of just the ostomy. So keep that in mind. Every person is going to be individualized. Do not go by cookie cutter websites necessarily. They're good for a general approach to your ostomy nutrition post-op, but they will not be the end-all be-all. The best thing to do is to seek out a nutritionist, a dietitian, an ostomy nurse, or a GI that is really familiar with your medical situation, really familiar with any complications you may have, and make sure that you're able to communicate to them, this is my medical history. How do you feel about dietary restrictions? What should I be doing? Another thing I want to mention is that having an ostomy certainly does not mean that you won't be able to enjoy food like you used to. Yes, you may have some complications with dehydration and electrolyte deficiencies and maybe some vitamin B deficiencies, but in general, your digestion is pretty much the same as it was before. The ostomy changes the outlet of your digestion, not the first parts of it. Your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, for the most part, have the same biology as they did before. Keeping in mind things like fiber, insoluble versus soluble, can make your time as an ostomate a lot less difficult and a lot less dangerous. Diet is probably the most important thing that an ostomate needs to keep in mind from day to day besides cleanliness around the ostomy. So please, I urge you, reach out to your doctors if you feel like something about your diet is not right, or if you want to get more specific to you guidelines about your ostomy and how it's best to take care of it. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I look forward to reading your comments. It has been so fun getting to know you and getting to hear your stories. It is why I started this, and it is just inspiring to me just reading about you. So please leave me a comment, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye guys!